Hello and welcome back to the In the Same Boat podcast. It is quite early where I am, 5:45 a.m. And that is because our guest is from Australia, but it's very worth the early morning. I have been excited for this episode since the minute that we thought of this idea. I will be speaking today to Dr. Bronwyn Gresham about climate anxiety and eco-anxiety. I think this is a topic I know that affects me, affects a lot of people around me, our volunteers, our followers, and at this point, most people worldwide. So it's really relevant and really important. We have a great conversation for you today, so make sure you stick around and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a very special guest and episode for you. We have Dr. Bronwyn Gresham. Did I say that correctly?
You absolutely did.
Perfect. She is a clinical psychologist and climate aware practitioner whose purpose is in progressing our personal and collective emotional and social well-being as we live in climate change. She's the CEO of Psychology for a Safe Climate, which is a nonprofit in Australia that fosters emotional engagement with climate change. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to start first by asking you to define for us what exactly is climate anxiety or eco-anxiety, because I think it's a relatively new term that's buzzing around and that we're all being affected by it, but just to have like a really comprehension of what it is.
Yes, even just that description of it buzzing around, it certainly does feel like it's gained a lot of traction, actually,
Yeah.
even just over the past few years. I'd love to begin, though, just by acknowledging where I am, because I'm actually calling from a different part of the world to you.
Okay.
In northeast Melbourne, if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
And because location and I guess a little bit about me is sort of then informs, I think, my response to this question on eco-anxiety, and I think that's important to acknowledge. So I live on Wurundjeri country, which is like northeast of Melbourne, which is on the southeast coast of Australia. And I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land who have really looked after and cared for country, river country, sky country, ocean country for so long. And a lot of what we do here with our work is inspired by and supported by First Nations knowledges and wisdom sharing, as in particular their sort of care for country and care for people, well-being being about, connection to our ancestry and our kin and our country and this interconnectedness piece, which is really just the soothing balm of our times, I think, and really what lies underneath a lot of anxiety, which is that sort of that myth of separation, which we'll move into a little bit. So yeah, it's a big question, and I guess I also land in that responding to this question also within my social location. So I'm 44. I'm a white cisgender person. I am educated in clinical psychology, but of course, you expand knowledges as you go in the world. And so my response to eco-anxiety is going to be, framed in that kind of way. And I really just want to acknowledge that that's just one way to speak about and to think about any emotion, including anxiety. So just naming that up front.
Yeah.
But yes, this big question, because Zamira, your work and the work that you do in the same boat and, bringing young people along for, ocean plastics reduction, cleanups, etc. Sort of, I can imagine just how eye-opening that experience would be in both a really beneficial, nourishing way, connecting way, but also just this expansion to the world, the broader, bigger world. And so eco-anxiety, is still a sort of a phenomenon that's getting experienced and being understood scientifically. But if we just pull it back to, our everyday experience, it's that sense of unease, concern, worry, fear, anticipation, dread around the unfolding, I would say, not just ecological crisis, but sort of the many, many crises that are unfolding, including the climate crisis. And I think the anxiety that many of us are feeling is sort of interlinked, not just sort of in the future. It's no longer sort of happening in the future. It's sort of anxiety that's very here and present and now, and is intermingled with many, many, many other emotions like fear and dread and overwhelm and so on. So I just kind of acknowledging that how we feel about climate is so broad, but there is a lot of spotlight. Anxiety is kind of come up as a really common experience, as it is for many things in life. So it's been in the spotlight, I guess you would say, in the media, and in our sort of language and our cultures as something that we can connect on, like feeling ecological anxiety or climate
Yeah.
anxiety is sort of like this common humanity experience that many people are speaking to.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that is very true. And I think also you were touching upon it at the beginning. It's really important to acknowledge that climate change and the climate global crisis, it's not just an environmental issue. It is like a psychological issue and it's a social
Mm.
issue as well. Like we
Mm-hmm.
know by now that it doesn't affect people the same.
Mm.
We know that it affects like genders differently, the income
Yeah.
level, races, where you live, and I think there are so many issues in the world that are happening at once. So it's not about prioritizing one or the other, but I think sometimes environmental issues get put a little bit in the bottom. But
Mm-hmm.
this is like a real crisis that we can't ignore. And
Yeah.
coming from the work that I do and talking to a lot of the volunteers, we're cleaning a lot of times in very remote areas.
Mm.
There's people that live there, but they're quite remote. There's
Mm.
islands that aren't anyone living in. So it's
Mm.
quite odd to be surrounded in like beautiful nature filled with trash and then maybe come back to a city and
Mm.
then just like be like, why isn't everyone like waking up to this? Like, how
Yeah.
do I then go on in my day to day seeing the products that I'm finding in nature, buying them? Yeah,
Yeah, it's such like contrasting experiences. Even
yes,
just, we hear that a lot here in Australia, just people moving from just driving out from the country back into the city is like
yeah,
a
yeah,
jolting experience to sort of move if you live more, along the coast or in the bushland that, where you just sort of, yeah, you're sort of less separated from nature into these concrete jungles
yeah,
where it becomes really in your face, just the outcome, I guess,
yeah,
of modernity and consumption,
yeah,
hyperconsumption, consumption on steroids.
yeah.
And so, yeah, it sort of really speaks to that diverse experience that we might have in our feelings.
Mm,
Psychology for a Safe Climate, we often refer to climate feelings, not just
mm,
climate anxiety, because we really want to recognize that variation is the norm when it comes to our emotional landscape. And actually, just
mm,
like our ecosystem needs biodiversity to be healthy and thriving and flourishing, so does our inner landscape. We need that diversity in all of our feelings are welcome, all of our feelings are needed, all of our feelings have a function, including
mm,
anxiety. And there's so much rich emotion there. And what often we hear in sort of like the media narrative is the climate anxiety getting in the way or being sort of too overwhelming, like we've got to get rid ourselves of climate anxiety. And then there's this other beautiful narrative in the media and probably within your communities, which is very validating, like anxiety is the normal response to this,
mm,
to an
yeah,
unfolding crisis. It's
yeah,
it's what we should be feeling and actually makes a lot of
mm-hmm,
sense because anxiety is
mm-hmm,
an emotion that sort of awakens us to be really alert to the reality that we're facing so that we can respond commensurately. And we know that this
yeah,
anxiety for us is layered when the response, the social response, the political response is not commensurate to the ecological need. And so then
yeah,
you get this like layered effect, I think, of intensification of the anxiety that's sort of situated within the self, but actually is situated within.
yeah. Yeah, it's quite interesting because globalization has its pros and cons. But one of the things is that, like, with specifically the climate feeling, climate anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
it's something that's like both individual but very collective. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
all, even if we experience it in different ways, at this point, worldwide, no matter where you come from, you're experiencing some form of feelings towards what's happening.
Absolutely.
And yet, I still think, at least I know for me, like, we don't really know what to do with it. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know exactly, like, how that is validated because it's not, like, I don't know. I don't know exactly how to do with it. And I know that from conversations I've had and even like my friends, it's such a fine balance between not being overwhelmed and overinformed to the point where you get paralyzed, where you feel like, I don't make a difference. I don't actually know what to do. And how can I go up against like corrupt leaders or governments or
Mm-hmm.
companies, but then at the same time feeling like, well, I'm not doing enough and I have a responsibility. And it's just like, how do you balance that?
That is, I love that because already you're sort of speaking to just the paradoxes, or what we might call like the dialects, between individual and
Yeah.
collective, these two sort of polar opposites that
Mm-hmm.
both are true. Both are
Yeah.
experiencing, we're experiencing both at the same time. And sometimes we forget one over the other. We
Yeah.
become really invested at a very individual level. We feel really strongly accountable. We have really heightened senses of responsibility, and we leap into, really dedicated, committed action. We put ourselves out there. We give up everything else in life for the cause. And that's what we see a lot in the climate movement, in the environment movement, is really deeply passionate, ecologically sensitive, tuned, empathic people, giving up so much in service of, the broader, bigger world.
Mm-hmm.
And you would say, there's sort of, then that's the sort of risk there, I guess. What we see is people burning out because there's this sort of realization, of course, that also we have limitations as individuals, and it's not an individual problem. Like, so it's sort of like, I think part of grappling with climate anxiety or any climate emotion is really it's partly grappling with these paradoxes, and
Mm-hmm.
that might be the paradox or the dialect between individual responsibility and collective responsibility. But it also, there's many out there, like, incremental change and transformational change, or personal well-being, like individual well-being, collective well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I love this sort of, it's a sense of like dancing around these things in order to find, what actually works for me, so that I can show up in my own authentic way with what I
Mm-hmm.
feel passionate about, and how I can contribute to the broader spectrum of movements out there. And it's really quite broad now. When I first started getting into environmental volunteerism, and even growing up as a young child, to be interested or care about climate change, or global warming as it was called back then, this is in the late 80s, early 90s, you had to be a greenie or an environmentalist,
Mm.
or a politician or an environmental scientist or a conservationist, or, there was sort of personas, I guess, that were quite
Yeah.
limited. And now you see there's this sort of like, I heard one CEO of a council here in Victoria say that every job is a climate job.
Mm.
That every discipline, every human has a role to play, can participate as a citizen, and whether that's participating as a parent, raising a family, or whether that's participating as a manager in a supermarket, or whether that's participating as a leader in a corporate, whatever it is, there's sort of a role for everyone. It feels a lot
Mm.
more
Yeah.
diverse and sort of welcoming of different disciplines. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's very beautiful. And in our first episode where I interviewed Vitsa van der Werf, he just kind of said, like, yes, as an individual, you can't take everything on. You can't,
mm,
as one person, fix everything. But at
mm,
this point, we all have a role. Like, no matter what job you work in, there is a difference that you can make.
mm,
And I really like
yeah,
that. It's like going back to kind of connecting with yourself and know that like there are limitations, but you can
yeah.
figure out within those limitations, okay, how much can I give to this?
Yeah. And it's great that there are limitations, because it's bringing us
Yeah.
back to earth, that we're not an individual separate from everyone else.
Mm.
It's sort of like this, it's just beginning to break down those dominant ideologies that have gotten us into this mess.
Yeah.
Like, I'm an individual and must be responsible and can change. Of course we can't. Of course, we're actually this part of the beautiful ecosystem, and there's not a hierarchy in that ecosystem. It's not like humans are better than
Yeah.
or worse than any other
Yeah.
part. We've all got a part to play in this ecosystem. I think that kind of metaphor, and other metaphors I've come across through this work are, remembering that we're part of the symphony of life, or the orchestra, or the
Mhm.
band, and each instrument and each person has a role to play. And sometimes you're the solo, other times you're the support, sometimes you're just taking a breath, sometimes you're finding a new band, sometimes you're the
Yeah.
conductor. That there's just sort of, it just
Yeah.
enriches, I think, and releases us from this idea that even though we feel like we wish we could do more, we're coming up against the reality that we can't do everything. And I think that there's something
Yeah.
really beautiful to learn in that space. It's very humbling, and it's like, oh, okay, I do have permission to take some space from this, because others will continue. I can take a breath and put my instrument down,
Mm.
and the world's not going. There are other people here
Yeah.
who care, who are doing a lot of
Yeah.
work, and
Yeah.
we help each other. That's the culture of sort of care that I
Right.
think this work and I think the environment movement can really lead on, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, something that I've seen a lot, I mean, in your own personal website and your LinkedIn is a lot of the word compassionate. With
Mm,
compassionate nature and community
mm,
as well came up a lot.
mm.
And it goes along what you were just saying, but I wanted to ask, like, how does that play a role in helping alleviate that
Yeah.
those climate feelings that we have and that overwhelmness of you feel like the world is burning, I can't save it, like what do I do?
Yeah. Even though I wish I could.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
as one of my psychology for a safe climate colleagues, Sally Gillespie, I think, writes in her book that we're trying not to be saviors, but to savor really our
Mm,
existence here on this earth and our contribution. So I love that sort of contrast. But yeah,
yeah,
compassion is a really important, multifaceted inner skill, but it's also an interpersonal experience.
yeah,
And I first learnt about compassion or mindful self-compassion through Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, who are based in the States. And they developed an 8-week course called Mindful Self-Compassion. And it's a really powerful course and a really powerful inner tool. And essentially what it is just we need compassion when we're in suffering or pain. We don't need compassion when we're feeling good. So compassion is a response to suffering. And what I often witness and have felt myself when it comes to witnessing whether it's the impact of an extreme weather event or at the moment in Australia, we've got multiple events on, one including the reef, which is
yeah.
bleaching at the moment on the west coast, and we call it grief
Mm,
that people are feeling, particularly those who are working intimately with the reef, whether that's in tourism or in as a marine scientist. But that I often see that we feel empathy, like we feel empathy, witnessing, hearing. We feel this what we call empathic concern, empathic distress, because we care. This is the
yeah,
pain of connection, because we
yeah,
care deeply about the world around us. We feel pain when there is pain there, and that's our in neuropsychology terms that our mirror neurons firing up, feeling what the other's feeling or imagining what the other's feeling and feeling that literally like our nervous system gets activated and we feel the pain. That's empathic distress.
yeah.
Compassion is this response to that empathic distress that awakens another part of our system, which is our mammalian, our mammal caregiving system. It sort of complements, it's like empathy plus love. It sort of comes to the table, it activates this other soothing system that says, oh, I see you, pain. I see you. I'm not going
Mm,
to make you worse. I'm not going to try to dismiss you or, wish you away because you're there. You're there for a reason. But what I can do is show up for you with warmth and love and care and kindness and friendliness. And in that, the brain is wired to be soothed through kindness and care.
mm,
And so compassion is this powerful, like inner response, but then it also invites us to act to alleviate suffering when we can.
yeah,
And this is where we come up against the challenge of the climate crisis because we can't always alleviate the suffering in that moment. We actually are just witnessing it. And there's a limit of our individual control as to alleviate. So we're left with the empathic distress. And if we don't meet that with compassion, we can really find our nervous systems, staying in that distress for a very long time. So
yeah,
compassion I see is this really important tool and we apply it a lot at Psychology for a Safe Climate in our workshops, but also in our climate cafes, in our communications. It's really one of the core skills that we are fostering in
yeah.
communities.
That's really beautiful because I think also within the environmental activist world or just environmental world, sometimes there can be some guilt and there can be some like blaming, like you're not doing enough. Like
Uh,
this is either your fault or like even I know that I've had like moments where I've been a bit more extreme and I'm just like, you don't care about the environment clearly. Like you need to get it together. And that doesn't work because you alienate people
mm,
and you make people want to just shut off their brain and be like, I don't
mm,
want to keep listening to how all of these statistics about, I mean, I have this about plastic and
mm,
microplastics, and it doesn't mean that we don't care. It's
mm,
just like, I don't know if our brain is meant to like be able to know all of these things and then not know what to do with it. So I
mm,
like that compassionate of being compassionate with ourselves, but
mm,
also of the people around us. And that it sounds like even coming in today, I just kind of want to be like, what do we do? How do we
mm,
get rid of this anxiety? How do we deal with the anxiety? But it's really like you need to sit like grief. It
Mm,
is another way of grieving and having to sit
mm.
with it and knowing like we can't do it all, but there are things we can do.
Yeah, I really hear you. Anxiety is such an uncomfortable, disconcerting. Oh, it's horrible. I mean, and
Yeah.
we all know what anxiety feels. We all feel, I mean, I felt it coming into this conversation. I had to go onto the trampoline and try to jump it out, you know. But of course I still felt it. You know, it's a sort of it's a signal that something's important and that
Hmm.
we're about to engage in something really important.
Yeah.
And it's very like dependent on the context of that moment and who
Yeah.
we are and what we bring in. So I would say like our experience of anxiety is sort of is really shaped by those things, by what's happening in
Hmm.
that moment and who what supports we have around us, what resources
Mm.
we have available to us. And I think this is where we begin to discern when anxiety can take that slippery slope to really
Yeah.
beginning to impact on our sense of how we can show up when it
Yeah.
really begins to undermine, because it can, anxiety is an emotion, but it can become dysfunctional.
Mm.
And I think that's what a lot of people get stuck in, that, really state of overwhelm. And then they, try to find ways to cope that can often make things worse through, coping through drinking or escapism or avoidance. But it's just a recognition that, yeah, like any emotion, when it gets to that extreme, in the absence of support and the absence of sort of like a process or a way to sort of process out how we're feeling, it can get kind of stuck on that sort of more downstream end of actually beginning to impact my sleep, making me feel cynical, like I don't want to show up for the world anymore. Like it can really have a huge impact. And at PSC, we're really committed to trying to prevent that from happening, to sort of prevent this idea that if you're a good activist if you burn out. Burnout's just part of the activist
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
Really trying to disrupt that narrative, because why? Why does it? Why do we? Why does it? Why do we have to feel intense anxiety if we care deeply about the ecological crisis? I don't know if it's necessarily a given, but we feel shame if we don't feel sometimes.
Yeah.
You're like, maybe I should care more, but it's not. It's just sort of like the reality of this
Yeah.
complexity. Like we can feel many things at once, actually.
Yeah.
And there are many ways to feel. We run these climate cafes, which are spaces where people can come together to share how they're feeling in that moment, on that day, with whatever's going on for them. And some people will be like, oh, when I signed up for this, this was on my mind, but today I'm actually feeling grounded and
Mm.
I've got a bit of sense of purpose. And whereas another person might be like, well, I'm feeling just despair, utter despair at the state of, and my lack of helplessness, and just every feeling is welcome and every
Yeah.
feeling's needed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess like community is really key. It's like the
Yeah.
compassion and community and knowing that we're not doing it alone.
Yeah.
And burnout is not the goal. It's not like an
I
award
hope
that we
not.
get.
Yeah, I mean that's that. We really feel like that's one of the things that is undermining our movement
Hmm.
is, and burnout's happening in lots of industries across the world in the workforce.
Yeah.
Burnout is not an individual. It's felt individually, but it's
Yeah.
actually not a mental health condition. It's in
Mm.
various diagnostic manuals as an organizational phenomenon. It's a group phenomenon.
Mm.
It's this sort of mismanagement or mismatch of cultural leadership factors
Yeah.
really impacting on our mental health and well-being, like unrelenting workloads. Like there's so much plastic pollution to clean up in the world. Like
Yes.
it's an
Yeah.
unrelenting, never-ending task. And if we sort of only sit with that, we're going to be like, whoa.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there's lots to understand. And I think there was something you said about, yeah, that guilt. And I think just
Yeah.
just speaking to that guilt, and just is so common. We do when we care and we're trying to be accountable, but we're living in a society that doesn't enable us to fulfill accountability to the point where we'd love to, because there's social, political,
Hmm.
modern barriers in place. We're left with holding that guilt.
Yeah.
And so I think part of being with that guilt is holding it in proportion and continuously just having to just hand it back over to the
Mm.
people who do hold the power and who can influence, the change that we need to see. And sort of, yes, being accountable, but in proportion,
Yeah.
and not sort of following that individualistic line of, I must do everything I possibly can, when actually, well, maybe not, maybe we need to redistribute some of that guilt back to where it belongs.
Yes,
and forgive
absolutely.
ourselves for being human and forgive ourselves for living in modern times where we're all in this state of transition. We are all in this state of transition. We're all doing it together.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot
That,
of,
yeah.
it's clumsy and messy and dark. And I think that's why feeling in community
Yeah.
is, what we do at PSC. That's why we focus on, rather than one-on-one
Yeah.
conversations, we focus on feeling collectively in
Mm,
groups and doing the
yeah.
work of emotional engagement in groups. Yeah.
Yeah. I like just felt a sense of relief too when you were saying like we're all in this transition and it's going to be messy and it's going to be
Mm,
confusing because there is sometimes we have to let go of this idea of like the perfect activist. Like, and I've
mm,
heard that in many different sectors. Like, I remember reading a book, Bad Feminist, and it
yep.
talks a lot about that and about letting go of like there is no such thing as the perfect good feminist. And same with an activist or somebody who cares about nature. It's like we're all humans. And I
Mm,
mean, I see it with my friends, I see it with myself and some volunteers. It's like now that we've seen firsthand a lot of the plastic is like
mm,
every time I buy something that maybe has
mm,
plastic, I just feel this like immense guilt and I go down this rabbit hole of like, do I even actually need this? Could I be like buying it differently? But what
mm,
if it's like really expensive? Like, am I just being selfish? Am I like all of these things that just go to like now the way that I consume everything is going to have an effect on like whether
mm,
we have a future or not. And it's
mm,
redistributing what you just said. It's like we're going to make mistakes and we're still going to
mm,
be buying things and
mm,
maybe figuring out what works and what doesn't for us. And that also like caring about the environment or being able to choose more sustainable options is still a privilege. It's still not
yeah.
something accessible to everyone.
No. Yeah, all that thinking process is just, it just feels so relatable. And I know people listening will be like, yes, yes, me too, Zamira. Like that's where my brain goes. My brain
Yeah.
certainly went there when I first had my kids. So I've got
Mm,
twins, and the waste that comes with and I grew up, with a mum who was an environmentalist, and
yeah.
she'd take me walking along the beach to pick up plastic straws and out with the plastic bags. We used to, we had contact paper on our, primary school books, but none of that fancy contact paper. We had to have brown paper, which was so embarrassing at the time, but probably quite on trend now, really.
Yeah, that's true.
So I grew up with this mentality, and my mum grew up, post Great Depression, so really owning things and food. Nothing was taken for granted. Her
Mm,
parents lived on food rations, so everything mattered. No
yeah.
waste. You do not waste. Even to this day, she's like, eat all of your food. Do not let that go to waste. I mean, it goes
Yeah,
to the compost now, so that's whew. But
that's good.
but it's just this sort of like mind tangle that we get ourselves into when we live in a modern world that doesn't make things accessible or
Yeah.
comes at a cost, which is connected to privilege, that we get all this mental energy goes into this. It's the same old story each time. And I guess the invitation is to like, how do we disrupt that? Because in that moment, the only person suffering is you in that elevated nerve. Like, imagine what that's doing to your nervous system. And so it's
Yeah.
like, how do we hold this deep care and be part of that transition towards the
Mhm.
change, that the transformational change actually that we're really pushing for, whilst also in proportion and directing that energy where it should be, and just sort of
Yeah.
like relinquishing that to the appropriate place and having that proportionate sort of response. Because yeah, I get myself into tangles. Where I was going with having kids was just the waste.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
tried disposable nappies, sorry, cloth nappies, and this was before they were really, really that popular. And it was hard with two
Yeah.
babies, newborns, and I think I just gave up at a point because I'm just like, I can't cope with this, and
Yeah.
had to kind of come to grips with that as what that meant, and had to apply a lot of self-compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. It's like I'm processing it, internalizing it, like that self-compassion, and again, just like being messy
Mm,
and that it's not
mm,
gonna, we're all transitioning, we're all figuring it out.
mm,
Even like the companies that sometimes as an NGO, it can be like quite frustrating. Like, come on, you have more to do, you can do more. And that's
yep.
absolutely true. It's like maybe also like they're also transitioning. And
Mm,
I have to believe, and I have met many people that work in the industries that do genuinely care and
mm,
are also trying to make a difference within their own work.
mm.
Nobody wants to see the world actually burn.
No, yeah, but
Yeah.
it's hard for some to really face that reality.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I hear you. I think that
Yeah.
can happen, and that can be where that sort of frustration can brew in the individual working for an
Yeah.
organization whose values might not be as aligned.
Yeah.
There's an appreciation that the organization is doing something and has a certain theory of change or a model, but that might be not, radical enough or
Yeah.
transformational enough according to the individual who's working on a different level. So, and you can see how that would add to the individual's
Yeah.
anxiety and despair and just, yeah, burnout ultimately.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's important to have that voice to keep advocating for the organization to sort of keep transforming. You have to
Yeah.
be coming from that grounded place of well-being. It's a lot easier to come from that place than from an anxious, burnt out place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And talking about all of this, about the way that we're all feeling either anxious or just grieving, I saw a post on your LinkedIn that the Australian Capital Territory, ACT,
Mm,
recently recognized that a healthy environment is a human right. And I
mm,
really found that so fascinating. And just even talking to you right now about how we're all experiencing different ways this anxiety, and it can be crippling. So it's not just that we need the ecosystems to physically live in, because that's
mm,
also a way that people are being directly affected by
mm,
it. They're being displaced from
mm,
their homes,
mm.
but also our like quality of life, our mental well-being is really dependent on the environment that we live in.
Percent. Yeah. What you're naming is the fact that like our inner world, our mental health or our emotional health is actually not private, it's public.
Mm,
So yes, it's felt like only I feel my feelings and
yeah.
sensations and hear my thoughts. That's opaque. No one can see that or feel that for me. But my experience of that is shaped, yes, by what is in my immediate environment,
Yeah.
their air quality, access to safety and shelter and water. It's all those social, environmental determinants of health and well-being, of course, impact our mental health because health and mental health are not separate. Mind and body are not
Yeah.
separate. So, yeah,
Yeah.
you're speaking to a really important part, I feel, of, I think, a growing consciousness because there's this sort of the climate movement's tracking along, but so is the movement around psychological awareness and emotional awareness and mental health, right?
Mm,
Like when I first started working as a clinical psychologist almost 20 years ago, there's a lot of stigma around emotions, around emotional well-being, around mental ill health. And
mm-hmm.
now there's still stigma. I won't say that I wish there wasn't, but there definitely still is, particularly with
Yeah.
some mental health conditions. But there's a lot more consciousness and awareness that all of us have a mental health journey and all of us are vulnerable in different ways to mental ill health under certain conditions, and certain conditions being like poverty, low socioeconomic status, low access to social supports, no access to health supports, etc. So there are certain, external conditions that impact our internal weather. And I think that we forget that sometimes, and we sort of try to respond to our own internal weather through individual skills and sense making, which is important, and doing mindfulness practices or self-compassion practices or exercise and healthy eating and all of those things that we know are really important to our physiology. And we have to also remember that there are these other influencing factors that also shape our inner landscape.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of again positioning the responsibility. It's just being proportionate. Like I'm responsible to a point, but actually there's only so much my mental health will elevate into flourishing if I don't have access to nature, or if I'm living in air
Mm-hmm.
pollution, or if I am eating processed foods all the time, or if I'm sedentary, or if I don't have a job. Like there's only so much you can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It seems like a no-brainer
Yeah.
now,
There.
doesn't it,
Yeah.
that they'd include that
Yeah.
in the law as a human right, access to a safe climate, access to a healthy environment. But it's quite a radical move. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what it's like in other countries or their human rights law, but yeah, I found it fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you just said, like, it feels almost a bit sad to say that it's a radical move because of how,
Mm.
like, obvious it should
It
be.
seems obvious, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's like, of course, obviously. And I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's great that we're talking about it. And I really think it's important for all of us to, I think there's can be a separation, just how sometimes physical and mental health are separated when they're not,
Mm.
are like, human world and the natural nature world is like
Mm,
separated a lot of the times.
mm.
And we
Yeah,
see it as different issues. We see it as like a
yeah,
human issue and a environmental issue or natural issue. And it's like, no, they're obviously interconnected
yeah,
since we're living in it.
yeah,
And there's a lot of people that are not connected as nature and don't have access to it. So that also maybe plays a part in not being able to see like the physical, like the changes or the effects that it's having, but that we need to be aware that it is affecting us.
yeah. Yeah, and it also limits the beautiful beneficial effects that our natural environment can have. I was facilitating for the Good Grief Network, their 10-step program,
Mm,
and one of the courses had a person from Southeast Asia, and they just don't have access to nature. So,
mm,
while some people are speaking to, what supports them is, going for a walk along a river or,
yeah,
spending time in nature camping at a mountain, they're like, we just don't have access to that. And it, the isolation that person felt in that moment and just the point of difference and the departure. I think it's
yeah,
it's a it's a huge, well, yeah, we're really privileged when we do have access, but it's almost like it shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a human
yeah,
right or
yeah,
just a life right, really, not
yeah,
just a human right. But
yeah,
yeah, it's funny how some things just seem so obvious when they become obvious, but obviously they weren't obvious decades
yeah,
ago.
yeah,
And
yes,
I respect that. And I think, for us here in Australia, and I'm sure other countries that have been colonized, where really only the First Nations people have known all along,
yep,
that there's not a separation, that when the river is harmed, it's like their heart is harmed, like a part of them. It's like an
yeah,
extension of them. And so they've known about the importance of relationship and reciprocity and taking care of each other, and country cares for you and you care for country, sort of thing.
yeah,
So it's not new knowledge, but I think Western sort of ways are just trying to catch up now and find ways to integrate it. Yeah.
yeah,
That's what it
yeah.
feels like. It's just playing catch up or something.
That's very true. And it's also
Mm,
like even more heartbreaking because the same people, the First Nations, Indigenous communities that have had that information are the ones that are now being the most affected
mm-hmm.
by those
Yeah.
changes
Yeah.
in the climate and our environment. Yeah, yeah, that and something also like what you said when you were talking about Southeast Asia, like I was recently, I think like information and resources are also
Mm,
so important because I was recently
mm,
in Vietnam and there is so much trash in
mm,
nature and a lot of times they
mm,
burn it. And that happens in Norway as well. I mean, one of the things
mm.
that we work with is like remote coastal communities where they don't have access to proper waste management systems.
Yeah.
So if a ferry comes to an island every year or every 2 years, in between, a lot of the trash, they'll end up burning it or throw it in the ocean
Yeah.
because there's both a lack of knowledge of like, this is actually harmful for the environment and
Mm,
yourself. I mean,
mm,
burning plastic is just one of the worst things you can do,
yeah.
but also resources. It's like
Mm,
these people, I mean, the minute that we go in and we're like, hey, you can call us, we'll pick it up for you, then they'll
yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
But it's just like, they don't have, like, we
Until
also
then,
need,
there's not an option.
yes, we need resources in place to facilitate people to transition into this as well.
Mm. Yeah, it's almost like when you're speaking like the parallel with mental health, like you're talking like right downstream, really, in the
Mm,
absence of, supportive structures and processes and
yeah,
priorities at that
yeah,
very high level. The result is a lot of waste, and a lot of waste that's not managed that then pollutes. And so
yeah,
you're trying to like work at this downstream end, whilst also, I'm sure, probably advocating for like better, the
yeah,
regulations that need to be put in
yeah,
place so that we have less plastic, or,
yes,
and just the slow uphill battle that can feel like, really, when the problem down here is just so acute. And absolutely, it's not a competition. Like, it needs tending to. It's the
yeah,
same with mental ill health. When someone's down there, you've got to tend to that individual, according to their individual circumstances for whatever amount of time it takes. But that doesn't mean like, yeah, that was a product really of their experiences much further upstream.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's very complex.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of factors to consider, but
Mm,
I have a couple more
mm.
questions for you,
Yeah.
but I wanted to ask, like, I mean, from our conversation, obviously the climate feelings and everything related to that anxiety is quite complex. There isn't just a one way fix it all. It's a
No.
process, it's community, it's talking. But I do want to ask you if you have any like tips or advice of
Yeah.
little practical things that we and like everyone listening can incorporate in their daily lives to
Yeah.
try to maybe alleviate or be able to process this a bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question because I can speak to my own experience, but
Mm,
also I guess I mean what the literature says is out there. You know, there are pamphlets, information everywhere on,
yeah,
and the one common thing we hear is, you know, action is the antidote to anxiety. And I say that, okay, I say that with a little bit of jest because it's sort of true, but it's also not enough. I think,
yeah,
I don't know if you've noticed that, but just taking action doesn't
yes.
alleviate all of the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think it is important to sort of think about like, well, what are the other, from the psychological point of view,
Mm-hmm.
techniques to help sort of manage being in one's body?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, first and foremost, just us having awareness,
Mm,
us having insight into how we're actually feeling. And that is like being mindful, I guess, of what we're feeling. So being aware, it's kind of accessing what we call our observer mind. Like it's part of me that can notice I'm feeling really a lot of discomfort in my stomach. I'm having a lot of racing thoughts. I'm thinking a lot of dramatic, dark things. I'm sensing myself retrieving. Like there's a part of us that can practice observing what's happening in our inner landscape. So I'd say like the first step is really just a commitment to just get to know what's happening
yeah.
here, because this
Yeah.
is important. This is part of the ecosystem. So that sort of brings me to that second component, which is approaching oneself as it like a relationship, and a relationship of deep
Mm,
care. So most people who are in this space care deeply about something around the environment, or a non-human in the environment, or a plant or an animal or an ecosystem or a landscape or whatever it is. And I would just say, you know, the second skill is really including yourself in that circle of care. So breaking down this notion of separability and really bringing a sense of inclusion to yourself. So getting to know yourself, what's on your climate journey is, what's happening in your inner landscape, what's sort of activating you, triggering you, what's how it's showing up, and getting to know, why is that showing up for me? Like what's my story, you know?
yeah.
How was I influenced to think that? Like just really dedication to get to know one's inner world in the spirit of deep relational care and compassion. And then the third thing, just from psychologically, really encourage people to have these conversations together in groups. So there are groups out there now like the Good Grief Network 10-step program. There's climate cafes that happen all across the world. PSC hosts some in Australia. We co-host some with Siri, an organisation in the UK, but I know they've popped up all over the world. So just showing up, it's sort of like an emotional massage. Like it's not something you can show up to once and it all's like good. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, it's like
Yeah.
exercise. You have to exercise the muscle. It hurts for a little
Yeah.
bit, but then there's a sense of relief, catharsis, sense
Mm,
making. Something happens, something shifts, but you got to keep returning to those spaces.
yeah.
Uh, and whether they're climate cafes or 10-step programs or creative processes and workshops,
Yeah.
but doing them with others is really the key, I think. And then just from that psychology, emotion regulation perspective, I think it's about really putting some words on how you're feeling. So
Mm,
developing that emotional language. We know that that's what activates this front part of our brain, which is
yeah.
really important for sort of helping us regulate intense emotions. So it brings us from, you know, this back to the front, and then, you know, just practicing learning different words, coming up with your own words for feelings. We had a really great word shared with us at a climate cafe. I was saying how it was the middle of winter here, and I was like, it's
Mm,
very warm. I was
mm,
dropping my kids off at school and I was chatting with some other parents, and they were like, isn't this weather great? And in my heart, I'm like, well, it sort of is great, but this is climate change because it's not meant to be this warm.
yeah.
It's winter. It's meant to be like 9 degrees and it's 20. That's not cool.
Oh God.
And yeah, this other participant said, oh, that's blissonance, this moment of
Mm,
feeling bliss in a moment, but the dissonance of that. Like you're not meant to feel
wow, I
bliss. And
like
I'm like,
that.
yes, that nailed it.
Yes.
It was more than, it wasn't anxiety, it was blissonance. So it's coming up with
Yeah.
words that really match our experience. And then, so they're the things I do just from that climate emotions perspective. So really getting to know our own landscape and our own climate journey, really forming a relationship with oneself that is caring and kind and
Mm,
compassionate. having spaces where you emotionally process together with others and listen to other stories and hear what others are experiencing. And we really feel like people feel much less isolated when they do that. And then there's a whole stream of things that people can do when they're with emotions, when they're feeling around their mental well-being. And there are some really good models out there that I encourage people to look at. They're more generic. So one is the 5 ways to well-being.
Mm.
And I share that one because it's a global type model. It was commissioned by the UK government, actually. The question was to a group of scientists, can you review the literature and come up with like a very simple framework model that would lift the population's mental well-being? Like what would be the top 3 to 5 things that people could do? And
Yeah.
so they did that and they came up with these 5 areas. I don't know if I'll remember them. What are they? Take notice, which is like mindfulness. Give, so being generous with your time, with your
Mm.
presence, with your money. Keep learning, so leaning into challenges, failing, learning again, mastering things. Connect, social connection in particular. And there's always one that you forget, isn't there? But that's for the listeners to fill in the
Yeah.
gap and to look that model up. And what it doesn't
Cliffhanger.
include, Zamira, is nature. It doesn't
Mm.
include nature very specifically
Interesting.
because not everyone in the world has equal access to nature. So that's like
Wow.
a general, there are other general models out there. And yeah, I hope there's so much. I guess I just, as a
Yeah.
psychologist, I always feel hard answering these questions because there's just so many like inner
Yeah.
skills out there and
Yeah.
so much accessible to us now through websites, through leaders in this climate psychology space, and really encourage people to read those books and listen to those podcasts, and just every little idea will sink in. And it's just about getting our own repertoire of things that we find work for my body, for my
Yeah.
mind, for my context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. No, I really like that. That's great because it isn't an easy answer. There isn't just like,
Mm.
here are the 3 things to do to get rid of it. It's just like, we got to sit with it. But I think the really big takeaway is like community, how important it is
Mm.
to feel that connection and we're not alone.
Yeah.
But I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I have one more question, and it's
Yeah.
for you, like, what gives you hope in the
Mm.
face of climate change?
That is a big question too. I'm saying this
Yeah.
with all of your questions because hope is also means a lot of different things to me.
Mm,
And it's also what we tend to find people wanting to sort of finish with. And I get
mm,
it. It's a sort of like we need hope. We do need hope.
mm. Yeah.
And it's sort of like for me, because of my practice, and I have a community of practice with people where we do feel feelings together, and I've been doing that for a very long time. There's less attachment for me to feel hope.
Mm,
I feel richer for the emotional landscape I have. And so
mm,
when I think of hope, probably the most useful sort of concept that I engage with a lot is Joanna Macy's active hope,
mm,
which is not optimistic hope. Optimistic hope is really important. So if that I apply to, I've got a little garden out the front that used to have all this, non-native plants, and I've taken them out and put a lot of natives in, and that gives me hope because I can see the little native bees and butterflies and birds
mm.
returning. So that to me is like a sort of a concrete hope. It's an action, and I know that there's going to be an outcome. I mean, I didn't know that my garden wasn't going to like take, but it's growing, and it's very, who'd have thought it? Nature is robust. So that's one kind of hope when we
Yeah.
sort of go in knowing that the outcome will go a particular way and we feel hopeful. But when it
Uh-huh.
comes to the climate crisis, our hope is often undermined because there are so many setbacks, and change is very complex and complicated, and it's transformational. It's not something we can readily imagine yet, but it's emerging and
Yeah.
emergent. And so active hope is this sense of connecting with what's truly important to us, like what's driving us, what do we wish for, and engaging in the practices that will get us there. So if I
Yeah.
wish that our cultures were more caring and connected, then I myself try to show up in a more caring and connected way. And there's sort of like a relinquishing of outcome, like I'm
Yeah.
letting go of needing the outcome that I wish desperately for, because actually I don't know. I actually
Mm,
don't know. I don't know one way or the other. I sort of know some things are going to happen, like there is runaway climate change. There are some things that are set for centuries to come. That's what the science is telling us, and
Yeah.
that's deeply despairing to me. And I don't know how humanity is going to show up and
Yeah.
transform that longer, like for many, many generations to come. So active hope is like, okay, even though I don't know, and even though there's some darkness unfolding, as
Mm.
Joanna Macy says, the great unraveling, there's also the great turning, and I'm part of that. And how do I show up, even though I don't know that even though I might not know what my efforts result in? It's again, it's a dismantling of modernity's story that we have to be productive and have outcomes.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean we let go of a vision. So it's holding uncertainty. I guess that's how I practice hope,
Yeah.
is sort of getting this balance between pessimism and optimism and just trying to just show up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd
Well,
love
yeah.
to ask how you find hope, Zamira, because I'm sure the listeners might be interested too. Just just today, like what yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it's like I really hold on to the individual people that I meet, that I can see how motivated they are and all of the work and the dedication and the care and the compassion that they put for the people around them and nature. I think it's like if I go to the global perspective, I get super overwhelmed, and especially in a work and working for an NGO where it feels like we're sometimes fighting against, like, because of financial issues or government policies or
Mm,
companies, like it just feels like a constant fight. And I just
mm,
have to hold on to those conversations of people like, yeah, I started this new like beach cleanup organization in my own community, and it's things of like, no, people do care
yeah,
and people are doing
yeah,
incredible things. And I think that's like how I hold on to hope. It's
yeah.
all of the volunteers that I meet when I'm on the boats and that they're spending their free time doing this. I'm like, there's incredible people out there.
Yeah, I so vibe with that, Zamira. I think like that, yeah, engaging in those moments, cleanup days, protests, that's what gives me
Yeah.
hope too. Like you just feel the
Yeah.
energy, you feel like, oh, okay, yeah,
Yes.
people, there's a mass here,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I really like what you said about holding the uncertainty, because honestly, I think that can apply to anything.
Yeah.
When you were talking about it, I was thinking about how like I'm 25, my 20s have been quite uncertain, and it's just been
Mm,
like coming to terms with like I can't control everything. And that's
mm,
a big part of also this global issue of this climate issue. It's
mm,
like I can't control what
mm,
ends up happening, but
mm.
within that, I have hope for
Yeah.
whatever outcome and what we can do.
Yeah. There's sort of like there's still things still within your realm of
Yeah.
control. And that might
Yeah.
have ripple effects into things that are outside of your control.
Yes,
Yeah, it's a
exactly.
bit of part of the mystery of life, isn't it? Not knowing quite the ripple effects of conversations, of actions.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
But yeah, those concrete actions I can totally see. Like, yeah, when I've gone to cleanup days, it just feels good. It feels good
Hmm.
to participate.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
And be part of
yeah, we got to
something.
follow what feels good.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. If people want to read more about your work or Psychology for a Safe Climate, where can they find that information?
Yeah, head to our website. I think it's probably the
Hmm.
best place. It's currently under
Yep.
redevelopment, but head to psychologyforasafeclimate.org. We've got an events listing page. That's probably the best place to start to find out if there's any climate cafes on. And we've also got what's called Climate Feeling Space. So just Google
Amazing.
Climate Feeling Space and that should come up. And that's a really nice landing space for 3 different sort of actions we have to tend to climate feelings. And I guess I'll just also do a plug also for a
Yep.
connected organization that we've just sort of been working alongside and helping mentor as they sort of get up and running, is EcoMind, and that's a youth focused climate mental health organization. It is also Australian based, but they've got a super duper website and a really cool climate feelings page. It's really interactive, and I think your listeners will love playing with that too.
Perfect. I'll put the links in the description down below, but thank you so much for your time, Dr. Bronwyn. And yeah, I wish you the best, and thank you for all the work.
Well, thank you for all your work and everything that In the Same Boat does. It's really admirable and inspiring. So thank you for also
Thank you.
including emotions and having this conversation.
Yes.
It's been
Yeah.
really enjoyable.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, Amira.